"Get off my bus, old man. This isn't a charity ride." The words cut through the morning air like a blade, sharp and merciless. The 67-year-old veteran, struggling with his prosthetic leg, looked up from his seat with quiet dignity. He'd served 3 tours, saved countless lives, and earned a chest full of medals. But none of that mattered to the bus driver, who saw only weakness. 1 hour later, the sky above downtown Chicago began to thrum with the unmistakable sound of Marine One. The president was coming, and he was angry. Marcus Thompson had been riding the 7:15 a.m. Route 22 bus for exactly 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Not because he was counting, but because routine was the only thing that kept the nightmares at bay. Every morning, same seat, 3rd row from the front on the right side, where he could extend his prosthetic leg without blocking the aisle, where he could watch the familiar streets of Chicago roll by and remember what normal felt like. The morning started like any other. Marcus woke at 05:30 hours, muscle memory from 20 years of military service. He dressed in his usual uniform, pressed khakis, a navy blue polo shirt, and a baseball cap bearing the Marine Corps emblem. His Purple Heart pin was fastened to his shirt collar, not for show, but as a quiet reminder of who he used to be. The prosthetic leg took 15 minutes to attach properly, the same routine he'd performed every morning since the IED blast in Fallujah took his right leg and nearly his life. His small apartment on the south side was sparse but clean. A single bed, a worn leather chair facing the window, and a small kitchen table where he ate his meals alone. On the wall hung a single-framed photograph, his Marine unit, 12 men standing proud in the desert sand, their faces young and invincible. Only 3 of them had made it home whole. Marcus was not one of them. The walk to the bus stop took 12 minutes on good days, 15 when his leg was acting up. Today was somewhere in between. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant promise of winter. Marcus moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world with mechanical parts, each step deliberate and measured. At the bus stop, he recognized the usual faces. Mrs. Rodriguez, heading to her cleaning job at the hospital. Danny, a young man with Down syndrome who worked at the grocery store. Sarah, a college student who always had her nose buried in a textbook. They exchanged polite nods, the kind of acknowledgement that comes from sharing the same small space every day without really knowing each other. The bus arrived at 7:17 a.m., 2 minutes late as usual. Marcus waited for the other passengers to board first, a courtesy that also served a practical purpose. Getting on and off the bus with his prosthetic required patience and careful maneuvering. The hydraulic doors hissed open, and he began the familiar process of climbing aboard. The bus driver was new. Marcus had noticed him last week, a heavy-set man in his 40s with a permanent scowl and a voice that carried the weight of someone who believed the world owed him more than it had delivered. His name tag read, Kevin Bradley, and he wore his authority like a cheap suit, too tight and obvious. "Come on, speed it up," Bradley muttered as Marcus carefully navigated the steps. The prosthetic leg didn't bend like a natural joint, requiring him to turn his body sideways and use the handrail for support. "Some of us have schedules to keep." Marcus said nothing. He'd heard worse from better men. He made his way to his usual seat, nodding to Mrs. Rodriguez as he passed. The bus lurched forward before he was fully seated, causing him to grip the armrest to maintain his balance. A small indignity, but one that stung nonetheless. The route was familiar, down State Street, past the old buildings that had watched Chicago transform from a rough frontier town to a gleaming metropolis. Marcus watched the city wake up through the scratched window, office workers hurrying with coffee cups, construction crews gathering around job sites, the endless rhythm of urban life. It was peaceful, predictable, safe, until it wasn't. At the Roosevelt Road stop, more passengers boarded. The bus was filling up, and Bradley was growing impatient. Traffic was heavier than usual, and the schedule was slipping. Marcus could see the tension building in the driver's shoulders, the way his grip tightened on the steering wheel. He'd seen that look before, in young soldiers who were about to snap under pressure. "This is ridiculous," Bradley announced to no one in particular. "We're already 10 minutes behind because some people can't move with any sense of urgency." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt the eyes of other passengers glance in his direction, then quickly look away. He kept his own gaze fixed on the window, watching the city blur past. In his peripheral vision, he could see Bradley's eyes in the rearview mirror, seeking him out, challenging him. The bus stopped at Michigan Avenue, and several passengers got off. Bradley's impatience was becoming palpable, his movements sharp and aggressive. He honked at a car that took too long to move through the intersection, cursed under his breath at a pedestrian who crossed too slowly. The atmosphere in the bus was shifting, becoming uncomfortable. "Some people think they're entitled to special treatment," Bradley continued, his voice louder now. "Think the world should slow down for them." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. He'd learned long ago that responding to provocation usually made things worse. Better to let it pass, to maintain his dignity through silence, but something in Bradley's tone suggested this wasn't going to pass. The confrontation came at the Adams Street stop. A young mother with a stroller was trying to board, and Bradley was growing increasingly agitated at the delay. "This isn't a daycare center," he snapped. "Figure it out or wait for the next bus." The woman struggled with the stroller, her baby beginning to fuss. Marcus started to rise from his seat, instinctively moving to help, but the prosthetic leg made him slower than he wanted to be. By the time he stood, the woman had managed to get the stroller onto the bus, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sit down, old man," Bradley barked. "You're blocking the aisle." Marcus looked at the driver, really looked at him for the first time. Bradley's face was red with frustration, his eyes hard and mean. There was something familiar about that look, the same expression Marcus had seen on bullies throughout his life, men who gained power by making others feel small. "I was just trying to help," Marcus said quietly. "Nobody asked for your help," Bradley shot back. "Just sit down and stay out of the way." The bus pulled away from the stop with a violent jerk, causing Marcus to stumble slightly. His prosthetic leg wasn't designed for sudden movements, and maintaining balance required conscious effort. He gripped the back of a seat, steadying himself. "What's your problem?" Bradley demanded, watching him in the mirror. "You drunk or something?" "I have a prosthetic leg," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the growing anger in his chest. "Sometimes it takes a moment to—" "A what?" Bradley interrupted. "A prosthetic? Well, that's just perfect. Another broken-down veteran looking for sympathy." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd faced enemy fire, survived explosions, endured months of rehabilitation, but nothing had prepared him for this casual cruelty from a stranger. The other passengers were staring now, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. "I'm not looking for sympathy," Marcus said, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "I'm just trying to get to my appointment." "Your appointment?" Bradley repeated mockingly. "Let me guess, another handout from the government? Another program for heroes who can't take care of themselves?" The bus had stopped at a red light, and Bradley turned in his seat to face Marcus directly. "You know what your problem is? You think that uniform makes you special. Think it gives you the right to slow down the rest of us." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just impatience or a bad day. This was something deeper, something personal. Bradley was enjoying this. Feeding, the discomfort he was creating. "I served my country," Marcus said quietly, but his words carried across the silent bus. "I did my duty." Bradley laughed, a harsh sound that filled the vehicle. "Your duty? You mean you got yourself blown up and now you want everyone else to pay for it?" The light turned green, and Bradley jerked the bus forward again, this time deliberately. Marcus, caught off guard, stumbled and nearly fell. His prosthetic leg buckled slightly, and he had to grab the armrest to keep from going down. The movement was awkward, ungainly, and he could feel the eyes of every passenger on him. Pathetic, Bradley muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Can't even stand up straight. Mrs. Rodriguez looked like she wanted to say something, but the words died in her throat. Danny, the young man with Down syndrome, was staring with confusion and concern. Sarah, the college student, had her phone out, but she wasn't taking pictures. She was typing, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "You know what?" Bradley announced, his voice filling the bus. "I'm tired of this. Tired of having to coddle every broken-down soldier who thinks the world owes him something." The bus was approaching the next stop, but instead of slowing down, Bradley accelerated past it. Marcus realized with growing alarm that this was his stop, where he needed to get off for his appointment at the VA hospital. The prosthetic leg had been bothering him more than usual, and he needed to have it adjusted. "That was my stop," Marcus said, pressing the button to signal the driver. "Was it?" Bradley replied with mock surprise. "Gee, I guess I didn't notice. Maybe you should have been more polite about it." The bus continued down the street, carrying Marcus further from his destination. He could walk back, but it would take time, and his appointment was in 30 minutes. More importantly, he could feel the situation spiraling out of control, and every instinct told him to de-escalate. "Please," Marcus said, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. "I just need to get to the VA." "The VA?" Bradley's voice dripped with disdain. "Of course you do. Going to complain about how hard your life is? Going to get your feelings checked by another government doctor?" The bus stopped at a red light, and Bradley turned to face the passengers. "You know what the problem is with this country? We spend too much time taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. People who hide behind their service records instead of actually contributing to society." Marcus felt his face flush with anger, but he kept his voice level. "I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm just trying to get to my appointment." "Your appointment," Bradley repeated. "Well, here's the thing, soldier boy. This is my bus, and I decide who rides and who doesn't, and I don't like your attitude." The bus pulled over to the curb with a sharp jerk, the brakes squealing in protest. Marcus looked around, confused. They were nowhere near a designated stop. Just a random stretch of street in an unfamiliar neighborhood. The VA hospital was still miles away. "End of the line, hero," Bradley announced, opening the doors with a hydraulic hiss. "Time to get off." Marcus stared at the driver, trying to process what was happening. "This isn't a bus stop." "It is now," Bradley replied. "You've been nothing but trouble since you got on, slowing down my route, making demands, acting like you're entitled to special treatment. I'm done with it." The other passengers watched in uncomfortable silence. Mrs. Rodriguez had tears in her eyes. Danny looked confused and distressed. Sarah was still typing on her phone, her face set in determination. "You can't just leave me here," Marcus said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I have a right to—" "You have the right to get off my bus," Bradley cut him off. "That's it. That's all the rights you have." Marcus looked at the other passengers, hoping someone would speak up, would say something, but they sat in silence, trapped between their discomfort and their fear of becoming the next target. He understood. He'd been in their position before, watching injustice happen and feeling powerless to stop it. With as much dignity as he could muster, Marcus stood up. The prosthetic leg felt heavier than usual, and his balance was unsteady. He made his way to the front of the bus, each step deliberate and careful. The aisle seemed longer than usual, and he could feel every eye on him. "That's right," Bradley said as Marcus approached the door. "Nice and slow. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." Marcus paused at the top of the steps, looking back at the driver. "I fought for this country. I lost my leg defending the freedoms you take for granted, and this is how you treat me?" Bradley's face twisted with contempt. "I didn't ask you to fight for me. I didn't ask you to lose your leg. That was your choice, and now you want everyone else to pay for it." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his years of service, in all the battles he'd fought and the sacrifices he'd made, he'd never imagined being spoken to like this in his own country, by his own countrymen. "Get off my bus," Bradley repeated, his voice cold and final, "and don't come back." Marcus stepped down onto the sidewalk, his prosthetic leg clicking against the concrete. The doors closed behind him with a finality that seemed to echo in the morning air. The bus pulled away, leaving him standing alone on an unfamiliar street, miles from his destination, with no way to get there on time. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, watching the bus disappear around a corner. The morning was growing warmer, and he could feel sweat gathering under his prosthetic leg. The VA hospital was at least 3 miles away, and walking that distance would be difficult and painful. More importantly, he would miss his appointment, and rescheduling would take weeks. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. The neighborhood was commercial, with small shops and restaurants just beginning to open for the day. A few pedestrians passed by, but they averted their eyes when they saw him standing there, obviously lost and distressed. He was just another broken-down veteran, another problem to be ignored. Marcus pulled out his phone, an old flip model that he'd had for years. He could call the VA and explain what happened, but he knew how that conversation would go. They would be sympathetic, but unhelpful, offering to reschedule for next month while his prosthetic continued to cause him pain. He could call a taxi, but his fixed income didn't allow for unexpected expenses. As he stood there, trying to decide what to do, he noticed someone approaching. A young woman in a business suit, walking with purpose and confidence. She was looking at her phone, but her eyes were focused on him. "Excuse me," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Are you Marcus Thompson?" Marcus looked at her with surprise. She was in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional style, and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. There was something familiar about her, but he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. "Do I know you?" he asked. "My name is Jennifer Walsh," she said, extending her hand. "I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I was on the bus. I saw what happened." Marcus shook her hand, still confused. "I don't understand." "I recorded the whole thing," Jennifer explained, holding up her phone. "The way that driver treated you was completely unacceptable. I've already uploaded the video to our news site, and I'm working on a full story." Marcus felt a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He didn't want to be anyone's victim, didn't want to be the subject of a news story, but at the same time, he was touched that someone had witnessed his humiliation and decided to do something about it. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I'm not sure I want this to become a big deal. I just want to get to my appointment." Jennifer nodded understandingly. "I can arrange for a car to take you to the VA, but before you go, there's something else you should know. That video is already going viral. People are angry about what happened to you." Marcus looked at her phone, where he could see the video playing. It was difficult to watch himself being humiliated, but he could also see the reactions of the other passengers, the disgust and shame on their faces. Maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe this needed to be seen. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "I've been trying to reach someone who might be interested in this story, someone who knows you." While Marcus was standing on the sidewalk, trying to process what had happened, Jennifer Walsh was making a phone call that would change everything. She had recognized Marcus's name from a story she'd covered years earlier, a story about a Marine who had saved the life of a young naval officer during a particularly dangerous mission in Iraq. That young officer was now the President of the United States. "White House Communications," came the crisp voice on the other end of the line. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News in Chicago. I need to speak with someone about a veteran named Marcus Thompson. It's urgent." There was a pause, then some shuffling as the call was transferred. Jennifer knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. The story she'd covered years ago had made it clear that President David Morrison had never forgotten the Marine who had saved his life. "This is Deputy Chief of Staff Williams," came a new voice. "I understand you have information about Marcus Thompson?" Jennifer quickly explained what had happened on the bus, describing the humiliation and abuse that Marcus had endured. She mentioned the video she'd recorded and the fact that it was already spreading across social media. "Hold on," Williams said, and Jennifer could hear typing in the background. "I need to verify some information. Can you send me that video?" Jennifer immediately forwarded the video to the email address Williams provided. There was a long pause as he watched it, and when he came back on the line, his voice was tight with anger. "Where is Sergeant Thompson now?" he asked. "He's standing on the sidewalk where the bus driver left him," Jennifer replied. "He's supposed to be at the VA hospital for an appointment, but he's miles away with no transportation." "We'll take care of that," Williams said firmly. "And we'll take care of a few other things as well. The president will want to know about this immediately." The call ended, and Jennifer turned back to Marcus, who was still standing on the sidewalk, looking lost and defeated. She didn't tell him about the phone call she'd just made. There would be time for that later. "The car will be here in a few minutes," she said. "It'll take you to the VA." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't need to repay me," Jennifer replied. "What that driver did was wrong, and people need to know about it. But more than that, people need to know who you are and what you've done for this country." As they waited for the car, Jennifer asked Marcus about his service, about the battles he'd fought, and the sacrifices he'd made. She learned about the roadside bomb that had taken his leg, about the long months of rehabilitation, about the struggle to find purpose and meaning in civilian life. But she also learned about the mission in Iraq, the one where Marcus had risked his own life to save a young naval officer who had been pinned down by enemy fire. The officer's name was David Morrison, and he was now the most powerful man in the world. "You saved the president's life," Jennifer said softly. Marcus looked at her with confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Lieutenant Morrison, the naval officer you pulled out of that firefight in Baghdad. He's President Morrison now." Marcus's face went pale. That was a long time ago. I'm sure he doesn't remember." Jennifer smiled. "I think you might be surprised." At 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, President David Morrison was in the middle of a budget meeting when his chief of staff burst through the door with an urgency that immediately commanded attention. "Mr. President," Chief of Staff Robert Chen said, "I need to speak with you immediately. It's about Marcus Thompson." The president's face went white. Marcus Thompson was a name he thought about every day, a man who had saved his life in Iraq and whom he'd been trying to track down for months. Morrison had wanted to honor Thompson properly, to thank him publicly for his heroism, but the Marine had seemingly disappeared into civilian life. "What about Marcus?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with concern. Chen handed him a tablet with the video loaded. "Sir, you need to see this." Morrison watched the video in stunned silence, his face growing darker with each passing second. He watched as Marcus was humiliated, mocked, and finally ejected from the bus like a piece of garbage. The man who had saved his life was being treated like a burden, a problem to be discarded. "When did this happen?" Morrison asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "About an hour ago," Chen replied. "The video is going viral. People are outraged." Morrison stood up from his desk, his face set in grim determination. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. Get Marine 1 ready. We're going to Chicago." "Sir," Chen said carefully, "perhaps we should handle this through official channels. Make some calls, have the driver fired, maybe invite Sergeant Thompson to the White House." "No," Morrison cut him off. "That man saved my life. He put himself in harm's way so I could come home to my family. And now he's being treated like garbage in his own country. Not on my watch." The president was already moving toward the door, his mind racing with plans. This wasn't just about Marcus Thompson anymore. This was about every veteran who had been forgotten, every hero who had been ignored, every person who had served their country only to be treated as a burden when they returned home. "Get me the Secretary of Veterans Affairs," Morrison continued, "and the Attorney General. I want to know how this happened, and I want to know what we're going to do about it." Within minutes, the White House was in motion. Marine 1 was being prepared for departure, security details were being coordinated, and officials throughout the government were being told to drop everything and focus on the Marcus Thompson situation. But Morrison wasn't done. He picked up the phone and made a call himself, directly to the Chicago Transit Authority. "This is President Morrison," he said when the director answered. "I want to talk to you about one of your bus drivers." The sound started as a distant rumble, barely audible over the traffic noise of downtown Chicago. But it grew steadily louder, a rhythmic throbbing that seemed to come from the sky itself. People on the street began to look up, shading their eyes against the morning sun. Marcus was sitting in a waiting room at the VA hospital, having finally made it to his appointment thanks to Jennifer Walsh's arranged transportation. His prosthetic leg was being adjusted by a technician, and he was trying to forget about the morning's humiliation. The video had been playing on the waiting room television, and he'd had to ask them to change the channel. He didn't want to relive that experience. "What's that noise?" asked another veteran in the waiting room, a young woman who'd lost her arm in Afghanistan. Through the window, they could see people gathering on the street, pointing at the sky. The sound was getting louder now, unmistakable. It was the sound of a helicopter, but not just any helicopter. This was the distinctive roar of Marine One, the president's personal aircraft. "That's Marine One," Marcus said quietly, recognizing the sound from his years of military service. "The president's helicopter." The other veterans in the waiting room looked at him with surprise. "What would Marine One be doing in Chicago?" someone asked. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't answer because a part of him was beginning to suspect something impossible, something that couldn't possibly be happening. Outside, Marine One was descending toward a cleared area in the hospital parking lot. Secret Service agents were already on the ground, having arrived minutes earlier to secure the area. The crowd of onlookers was growing, with people streaming out of nearby buildings to witness the unprecedented sight of the president's helicopter landing in downtown Chicago. Jennifer Walsh was among the crowd, her camera crew capturing every moment. She'd been following the story since it began, and she had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The helicopter touched down with practiced precision, its rotors still spinning as the door opened. Secret Service agents emerged first, followed by White House staff members. And then, stepping out into the Chicago morning, came President David Morrison himself. He was exactly as Marcus remembered him, but older now, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of the weight of leadership. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie, and his expression was set with determination. Morrison looked around the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces until they found what he was looking for. There, visible through the window of the VA hospital, was Marcus Thompson, sitting in a wheelchair while his prosthetic leg was being worked on. The president began walking toward the hospital, his entourage following. The crowd parted before him, people pulling out their phones to record this historic moment. But Morrison's attention was focused on only one person. Inside the VA hospital, chaos was erupting. Staff members were running around trying to figure out why the President of the United States had just landed in their parking lot. Security guards were frantically calling their supervisors, and patients were crowding around the windows to get a better view. Marcus sat in his wheelchair, staring out the window at the approaching figure of President Morrison. It had been 15 years since he'd last seen the man he'd saved in Iraq, and the memories came flooding back. The firefight, the wounded officer, the desperate evacuation under enemy fire. He'd done his duty, nothing more, nothing less. "Sergeant Thompson?" A Secret Service agent had appeared at his side. "The president would like to see you." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The technician working on his prosthetic leg looked up in confusion, but Marcus waved him away. "We'll finish this later," he said. He was transferred to a different wheelchair, one that the VA staff had quickly found for him. As he was wheeled toward the hospital entrance, he could see President Morrison waiting outside, surrounded by agents and staff, but somehow managing to look completely focused on the task at hand. The doors opened, and Marcus was wheeled out into the morning sunlight. President Morrison stepped forward, and for a moment, the two men just looked at each other. The crowd had grown to hundreds of people, all watching in silence as history unfolded before them. "Hello, Marcus," Morrison said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Mr. President," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the emotion he was feeling. Morrison knelt down beside the wheelchair, ignoring the protests of his security detail. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." You don't need to thank me, Marcus said. I was just doing my job. Your job was to serve your country, Morrison replied. And you did that with honor and courage. But what you did for me went beyond duty. You saved my life, and I've never forgotten that. The president looked around at the crowd, at the cameras recording every word, at the faces of the people who had gathered to witness this moment. I heard about what happened to you this morning, he said, his voice growing harder. About how you were treated on that bus. That's not the America I know. That's not the America you fought for. Marcus felt tears threatening to fall, but he held them back. It's okay, Mr. President. These things happen. No, Morrison said firmly. It's not okay. And it's not going to happen again. The president stood up and turned to address the crowd. This man, he said, pointing to Marcus, is a hero. He served his country with distinction, and he saved my life in combat. He deserves our respect, our gratitude, and our support. Every veteran deserves that. The crowd erupted in applause, but Morrison wasn't finished. I want everyone to know that I've ordered a full investigation into what happened this morning. The bus driver who humiliated this American hero will be held accountable. The system that allowed this to happen will be reformed, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that our veterans are treated with the dignity and respect they've earned. While President Morrison was speaking to the crowd outside the VA hospital, Kevin Bradley was sitting in his supervisor's office at the Chicago Transit Authority, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse around him. Bradley had finished his shift with a sense of satisfaction. He'd shown that old cripple who was boss, put him in his place. Other drivers had their own stories of difficult passengers, but Bradley prided himself on not taking any nonsense from anyone. He'd been looking forward to telling his buddies about the morning's confrontation. But when he walked into the CTA office, he found his supervisor, Janet Martinez, waiting for him with a grim expression and a phone in her hand. "Kevin," she said, "we need to talk, now." Bradley shrugged and took a seat. "What's up? If this is about being behind schedule, I can explain." "It's about a video," Martinez interrupted, turning her computer screen toward him. "A video of you throwing a disabled veteran off your bus." Bradley's face went pale as he watched the recording. There he was, in full view of the camera, humiliating and abusing Marcus Thompson. The video had been viewed millions of times, and the comments section was filled with outrage and calls for justice. "This is taken out of context," Bradley said weakly. "You don't understand what happened." "I understand perfectly," Martinez replied. "You violated every rule we have about treatment of passengers. You discriminated against a disabled person, you abandoned a passenger in an unauthorized location, and you did it all while representing the Chicago Transit Authority." The phone rang, and Martinez answered it. "Yes, he's here," she said. "Yes, I understand. We'll take care of it immediately." She hung up and looked at Bradley with disgust. That was the mayor's office. They'd been getting calls all morning, and not just from Chicago residents, from people all over the country, all asking the same question. How does the CTA allow drivers like you to abuse veterans? Bradley was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Look, I made a mistake. I can apologize." "You're fired," Martinez said flatly. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out of the building. And Kevin, don't bother using us as a reference." But Bradley's troubles were just beginning. As he was being escorted out of the building, his phone began ringing. Reporters, angry citizens, even some of his own family members who'd seen the video. His social media accounts were flooded with messages, most of them expressing outrage and disgust. By the time he got home, there were protesters outside his apartment building. People holding signs reading, "Respect our veterans," and "Fire Kevin Bradley." His landlord was waiting for him, eviction notice in hand. "I can't have this kind of attention," the landlord said. "You need to be out by the end of the week." Bradley's wife, who had initially been supportive, changed her tune when she saw the video. "How could you do that to that poor man?" she asked. "He's a war hero, Kevin. He lost his leg serving our country." "He was slowing down my route," Bradley said defensively. "I have a schedule to keep." "You have a heart to keep," she replied, "or at least you should." Within hours, Bradley's life had been turned upside down. He'd lost his job, his home, and possibly his marriage, all because he'd chosen to abuse a man who had served his country with honor. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson was standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, surrounded by his fellow veterans and their families. He was wearing his dress uniform, the one he'd thought he'd never wear again, and his chest was adorned with the medals he'd earned through years of faithful service. President Morrison stood beside him, holding a small velvet box. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president said, addressing the assembled crowd, "it is my honor to present the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, United States Marine Corps." The medal was placed around Marcus's neck, and he stood at attention as the crowd applauded. But this wasn't just about one man or one medal. This was about something much larger. In the months following the bus incident, President Morrison had launched a comprehensive review of veteran services across the country. The Marcus Thompson Initiative had resulted in new training programs for public servants, increased funding for veteran support services, and a national awareness campaign about the sacrifices made by those who serve. Kevin Bradley had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when disrespect and prejudice are allowed to flourish. He'd eventually found work as a security guard, but the video of his abuse of Marcus Thompson followed him everywhere. It had become a teaching tool used in diversity training programs across the country. The CTA had implemented new policies for dealing with disabled passengers, and their drivers now received extensive training on treating all passengers with dignity and respect. The bus route that Marcus had been riding was renamed the Honor Route, and it featured displays honoring local veterans. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The shy, withdrawn veteran who had once tried to make himself invisible had become a powerful advocate for his fellow veterans. He spoke at schools and community events, sharing his story and reminding people that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. "I learned something important that day," Marcus said in his acceptance speech. "I learned that dignity isn't something that can be taken away from you. It's something you carry inside yourself, regardless of how others treat you. And I learned that sometimes standing up for what's right means being willing to be seen, even when you'd rather be invisible." The president shook his hand, and Marcus could see the gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," Morrison said quietly, "for everything."